Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name, of course, is Seesaw or Chris, and today we are talking about some of Guild Wars 2's Endgame. Now, I've talked in other videos about Endgame before. I've shared sort of things I've liked and things I don't like, but I've never really done a great quick sort of summary of all the endgame objectives. That's also changed over the expansions, but as there's a lot of new players coming into the game right now, I figured, hey, let's do a quick rundown of some of the things you can expect to do at endgame. So the first thing is you can either do PvE or PvP. We're just going to very briefly look at the PvP here. There's SPVP. You can do just unranked or ranked. You can get a bunch of rewards through playing ranked specifically, and it can actually lead to getting some ascended gear now, which is really nice. Back in the day, you really couldn't get gear through PvP, so it is nice that it offers that. You also have reward tracks, which enable you to sort of choose what you're earning. You can get exotics through here, and you can get some living map or living world map currencies through here too, such as the Bitterfrost Frontier track that I'm looking at right there. So it does offer a lot of different ways to earn rewards. And specifically in terms of gearing through it, I think I'd need a whole entire video dedicated to that. The other side of PvP is World v World. Very similarly, you have reward tracks as well. You can see you can also get legendary item components through it as well. But there is a battle track for each dungeon that I should mention, and that will give you exotics from that dungeon as well as tokens to go spend at the dungeon vendor that we'll get at the end of the video here. And then you also earn currency through these chests very similarly to SPVP. And this is kind of a newer thing that's been added to World v World to make it more rewarding as well. So that's kind of a very side place of the endgame content if you do want to do PvP. But it is nice to know that you can get gear for PvE through PvP now, which is something you weren't able to do initially. So the other big thing is living story maps. I'm specifically looking at Living World Season 3 here. These are some of the great maps that we used to go to. And in these maps, you could do a bunch of different events that would give you some exotics, but you could also earn map currency that would end up giving you some nice ascended gear. In these maps, they're a really great way to kind of get yourself into level 80 content because they're not difficult, obviously. And you're doing a lot of these events sort of with large groups of people. So even if you kind of suck, it doesn't really matter because you're going to be carried along with everyone else. It's also a really fun way to experience sort of group content in Guild Wars 2 because you're traveling with these big zergs. You're kind of learning how to exploit a map by following other people's lead. Now, within each of these maps, the currencies do also drop from sort of nodes that you can go harvest. For instance, I'm in this sort of frosty area here, and the big thing you collect here is winter berries, and you go and actually use your sickle and collect them from what would look like herb nodes, and you grab the berries, and then you go and return them to this vendor here. Now, in every single one of these maps, there's going to be a vendor like this that'll take the map currency and allow you to buy a variety of different ascended pieces. Generally speaking, they're kind of your sort of back pieces, amulets, rings, trinkets that you would replace with. And each map has sort of a different offering. In terms of stats, you actually can select the stat type of each one. So you can go in there and you can choose your Berserkers, which is like a power DPS, or you can choose Vipers, which would be like a Condi DPS. You could choose, your Magi or healing one or your tanking one. So there's a lot of different options that way. And it's a really good way not only to start a new character, but in terms of sort of filling out your alts, just sort of doing that daily would be very good. That is sort of the other part of it, is that it is a daily sort of thing you have to do. So speaking of equipment in general, I kind of look at it at three different areas. You've got your sort of actual equipment pieces, which is on the left side there. That's like the helmet, the shoulders, the chest, the gloves, the pants, the feet. You've got your weapons. On my Elementalist, obviously, I only have sort of the one sort of slot, but most classes have sort of two different slots you need to equip. And then at the bottom right, you also have your rings and all that. So as I mentioned, the living world stuff is really good to get sort of rings and all that, whereas getting the other equipment can be done in many different ways. Now, in a lot of games, you kind of prioritize the weapons and the equipment and then sort of look at the rings and stuff later on, or at least that's what I used to do. Guild Wars 2, the rings and stuff are actually the more important thing to get. They contribute a fair amount of your stats. I'm not going to go into a huge detailed thing about what gear you should get and when you should get it, because that would just be way too much for this very quick episode. But what you need to know is that it's good to go for the rings and stuff first, weapons probably second, although they're pretty important as well, and the actual gear pieces like your shoulders and helmet and stuff like that don't contribute that many stats, so it's not that essential. And in terms of essentialness, you can do most of the raids and exotics. People will hate you, but they're not required. The only place that you actually require ascended gear is in Fractals of the Mist. You can see here, this is sort of a drop down of all the stats you can choose, and that would be very similar for a piece you would get from the living world, where you can go and choose the stats like that. And realistically, a lot of gear that they award in Guild Wars 2 allows you to choose stats like that, which is really nice because it does offer you the flexibility to use it on a lot of your different characters. As this gear isn't soulbound either, you can sort of move it between your account, even if you've worn it, say, on your elementalist, like a attack power berserker ring for like a whole expansion. Next expansion, if you're making like an attack power berserker warrior, you can just easily switch that over, which is nice. The next big thing to talk about is dungeons. You can see here in the group finder that you can go through to each specific dungeon and look at any groups that are going on. The one thing you will have to do is actually travel to the dungeons, so kind of be aware of that before you join a group, because it can take some time to get there. Dungeons are great. They are a great way to get exotic gear. They're not necessarily required as part of your progression system. I know a lot of people like to do it sort of to get the story of the game, and it is a good way to get exotics, but you can very easily just buy exotics from the auction house, so it's not completely required. There are some key moments where it is required, and I'll get into that in a second here. Once you have completed dungeons, you'll start getting tokens that are specific to each dungeon, and you can convert them to gear here. So you can sort of see, I go to Ascalon Catacombs, and you look here and you have all these weapons for specific amounts of tokens. Now, this is very different from the sort of ascended gear where you could choose your different stat type. Here, there's going to be some specific stat types that are offered for each dungeon. So I almost recommend going and checking out this vendor before you go and do a bunch of dungeons, so you can kind of see what you're going to be able to get for that dungeon. And then each piece has a different amount of tokens that they require. So just really making sure you're aware of what you're going to be earning is a very big part of this. So the main reason that dungeons are still necessary, actually, for people with ascended gear are the runes sometimes. So for instance, this Superior Rune of Monk here is one of the best runes for healers. As you can see there, the plus 10% outgoing healing effectiveness is like awesome. So oftentimes on a new healer, I will go and run a bunch of Ascalon Catacombs to get enough of those runes to fill out my 6 pieces of gear. So you do find yourself going back to dungeons once in a while, and it's kind of a fun way to explore it that way. The next big thing is Fractals of the Mist. This is very easily what you could start your endgame progression with. I mean, obviously you could go to dungeons and then to this, but you could easily start at scale 1 Fractals as well, because it doesn't require Agony. And I guess that kind of brings us to the topic of Agony. Agony is what you require ascended gear for. I was saying before that raids don't necessarily require ascended gear. Fractals will eventually require it, because you need to go through your gear and you need to infuse it with Agony. So when you walk up to the Fractals of the Mist here, you can see that it's broken into 4 tiers. Each tier will have some daily fractals that give you more rewards. Generally speaking, when people run their daily fractals, they'll go and they will do these specific marked fractals. Obviously, it is possible to go in and just sort of start climbing through the fractals and doing all of them. You'll have a little bit of a slower time finding groups for ones that aren't marked as daily, but you can obviously run that whenever. In terms of endgame, once you have like maximum agony and all that, you're going to be wanting to do the tier 4 daily fractals each day. And the reason you do this is because if you do the tier 4 ones, you'll get all the rewards for the tier 3, the tier 2, and the tier 1. So by doing that one fractal, you're essentially getting rewards for doing like 4 of them. This is a change that they actually did a little while ago now. I think it was even with Heart of Thorns maybe. But it's really made fractals very rewarding. You can check the dailies in your sort of achievements area underneath dailies. You'll see daily fractals, and it sort of lists which ones are the daily fractals, and it also gives you a really nice time remaining to show you how long until the dailies switch over, so you're not joining in with 10 minutes left, which sometimes is actually a pretty fun thing, but sometimes pretty bad. So I'm just going to walk up here. I don't have any agony resistance on this toon, and that's why it had all those like higher end ones in red, showing that I would die. So I've chosen a fractal scale 20 here. Suggested agony resistance is 8. And you can come over here and sort of just check out what that agony is going to look like on you. So it does chunk away a fair bit of my health. And you can get it stacked on you more than once in a fractal. And it's pretty hard to avoid all agony, so is generally like you're going to need the agony resistance. Like you could do some that are a little bit yellow, but you're going to get just destroyed in red ones and people are going to hate you. So this brings us to the whole Agony Infusion sort of area. That's the whole point of doing fractals. You'll get Ascended gear from fractals, which is great for like all parts of the game. And then you'll also get currency to buy Agony Infusions. That sort of, you can see here I have an unused Agony Infusion slot on most of my gear. And you'll just pop that in there. And it'll increase your Agony Infusion. Now, another thing sort of to talk about is that in raids, you don't need Agony. And this is kind of something that I really dislike about the progression system in Guild Wars 2, because I find it kind of a disconnect for new players that you're trying to get all this Agony Infusion in the dungeons of Guild Wars 2, or the fractals of Guild Wars 2. And then when you're moving to this sort of the next tier of content, you kind of disregard this agony. And, there are some things to be said. I made a video recently, and I'll link it here, sort of talking about my suggestion of bringing agony into raids. And I might not be the first one who's made that suggestion, but I think it would be a great way to sort of progress things. But it's important to know that agony is specifically for fractals at this point. You can also get just pure on Ascended gear, which is great. Before, you were only able to get kind of rings and stuff like this from fractals, so the fact that you can actually get full-on Ascended pieces from here are pretty good. It is kind of a confusing system that I think I need to devote an entire video to sort of explain all the different currencies you have to collect and sort of daily gating to get the Ascended pieces, but it's just great for you to know that you can get them. So we're also going to talk about raids, but the one other thing I should talk about is actually buying Ascendeds, or crafting Ascended with gold. You can craft Ascended armor and equipment with gold, as well as back pieces you can kind of forge with gold. So you can get a lot of your gear with gold, which I find pretty interesting, because a lot of games you're not able sort of to equip all of the endgame gear with gold. I think Guild Wars 2 allows you to do that a lot more easily. So, like just generally speaking, I find compared to most MMOs I've played, gold is kind of the champion currency. Oftentimes I find that, I'm trying to collect a specific token or something like that. And that does happen. We're going to get right into that with raids. But gold is so important in this game. So if there's any way you want to prepare for endgame, you could actually just farm gold and you'd be pretty set to make anything. Personally, I prefer to earn like Ascended gear through fractals and raids. But if you want to go the route of, armor smithing or something like that, that's definitely an option. In terms of raids, you have two types of tokens now. You've got the first one, which are these Magnetite shards, and they come from the Heart of Thorns raids. So that's wings 1 to 3 and wings 4. And then for Heart of Fire, you have gating Path of Fire. Sorry, Heart of Fire does not exist. Path of Fire, you get gating crystals, and they're kind of different currencies that way. However, as you'll see in this vendor, you can buy a lot of things here with Magnetite shards, but at the very end, you can also convert Path of Fire currency, the gating crystals, to Magnetite shards. So it allows you sort of to convert them backwards that way, which is pretty nice. So you can really get most of your Ascended pieces through here. Now, there will also be vendors within each of the raids themselves that sell more expensive items that have a cosmetic look to them. So like if you want an actual like weapon that's sort of themed off of the raid that will drop from the raid bosses, you'll have to go into the raids and sort of talk to the specific vendor in there and see what they offer. But that's more of a cosmetic choice. If you're looking to just get geared as quickly as possible, I recommend that first vendor I looked at. So there you go, guys. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to talk to you guys in the next videos about specific pieces of the content, but this is my summary, and I hope you liked it. Thanks for watching.